Oh, shit.
Oh, I will be right back. Welcome to Motorbike Mondays. This is episode 7. This is Evan from Racetech Electric.
This is Brady from Seaweed and Gravel.
And this is Jared from Seaweed and Gravel.
So, welcome back. Hopefully you listened to episode 6, which we just did the other day, all about charging systems, stators, regulators, rotors. Hopefully that helped some people and was a good topic.
I listened to it the other day, and I actually learned quite a bit myself.
Yeah, I was like, dang, I'm definitely going to listen to this one next time.
Yeah, there was some good info on that.
I didn't know you were so smart, Evan.
You wouldn't think so by listening to me talk, but I'm smarter than I look, I swear.
Yeah, and I bookmarked for future day to go through on your website all of your like tech tips and crap like that on there.
Yeah, there's some good stuff on there. I linked all that on the page for the show on the website. So if you listen to the show on iTunes or anywhere else, you might want to go to motorbikemondays.com and look at the page for episode 6 so you can see all the resources I put on there. Definitely some good info there. Tonight we're going to be talking about wiring harnesses.
What's in the shop?
No, we're going to get to that. I'm just letting everybody know.
He's letting them know.
It's all right. I mean, he never mentioned the topic before. What's in the shop before?
I guess I didn't. I'm trying a new thing. Like I'm just freestyling. Like what if they just listen
scared of change,
to the start of the show and they're trying to decide like what are these guys going to talk about? I don't know if I want to listen to this.
Well, because
now I gave them a preview.
Then they read what they just clicked on. Which is going to have the topic and the
all right, fair enough.
I think.
What if they can't read? What if they can't read?
Well, then they've got a lot to...
I always listen to books on tape in high school. I don't know about you guys.
I listen to books on tape all the time.
Yeah, but how do you know you're listening to the right book?
Because the teacher said you have to read Hamlet, so I just downloaded Hamlet on tape.
But did you read Hamlet?
I listened to it.
Did you...
I think we're going off in different tangents here.
Well... All right, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
This is kind of like a book. I wasn't talking to you. This is kind of like a book on tape, I suppose. If
that's where I was going with it.
Well, I mean, it might as well be the Phoenix Online degree.
Online degree, online college.
Yeah.
All right, so back on...
University of Phoenix Education and Motorcycles. I suppose that's what we're doing.
You'll probably learn more in MMI or on this than in MMI.
From what my experience with that, I think that might be true.
Yeah.
Unless they're interested in advertising with us, in which case that's a hell of an education, and we'd love to have you on board. Anyways, so we're recording this a couple days after the last one, so we don't have any new emails or comments or anything to read. We'll have some next week, I'm sure. So anyways, we'll just jump right into what's in the shop. Right? Isn't that... you did it last week and it's funny, and I do it and I'm an asshole.
That's because
I've never laughed at it
Brady
once.
hates it.
Either one. I don't
What's
hate
in
it.
the shop?
I think I've got something
is.
against jingles.
That's my singing voice.
I'm gonna record a little song. I'm gonna record a little song on guitar.
We could garage band that shit.
Yeah, we should. We should make like custom intro music and like
Dingo and the Baby.
And little like intros to our different sections and stuff.
Yeah,
awesome.
I spent 3 solid days when we were like in the development of this podcast on GarageBand.
Doing what?
Trying to figure out a freaking like intro song.
Oh.
And after 3 days of working on like 4 different things, I deleted them all and went to a royalty-free song because I forgot that those existed.
Were you actually like creating music?
Yeah, man. I'm a musical guy.
It was super heavy
so
metal.
Am I.
I get sensitive.
I would love to hear your intro options. Do you still have any?
No, I deleted them.
Oh,
he was using the onboard keyboard.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. Were they like dubstep or?
No. I didn't feel like that would be appropriate.
All right. Well, maybe we'll look into recording some of our intro music.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll put some. Actually,
That would be.
I'm gonna
be
work
all
on something, guys.
I'd be all for that.
I'm gonna work on something.
Or if any of our listeners are, I feel like we are all like somewhat musical abilities, but if anybody's better than us, then you should let us know if you could make us some sounds.
Oh yeah,
Somebody might be
fun.
We need
interesting.
one of those people that makes like the actual like radio edit things, like all the clips and stuff.
No.
Yeah, you can find
Evan
people.
and I are on the same page.
Yeah, there's
No, I don't-
a website. You know, I can't remember what it's called now. That like you pay people like $5. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh, it's called Fiverr. That's what it is. You pay like people do like really small, simple jobs for $5, and it's stuff exactly like that. Like for $5, I'll make you like a 10-second audio clip or something.
Basically,
Yeah,
like
that's pretty
Charlie
chill.
Sheen.
We could totally
on
find
Two
some
and a
idea.
Half Men before he got kicked off. The
Yes, that's yes.
Could it be-
We
that's
need a jingle
exactly-
maker.
Yeah, we need
hire
a
them to
jingle guy.
like clean like 5 feet of my gutters for $5.
Yeah. Look at the website, dude. You name it. You come up with anything.
show. Taller a foot.
That's
Look at-
awesome.
I would pay
It's
that.
called.
Yeah.
It's like Fiverr.com. I think it's like FIVR or something like that.
There's got to be some
Yeah, check it out.
desperate people out there. They're gonna clean my gutters.
$5 is $5, man. You can get people to do just filthy, like
no,
gutters,
no,
like gutters,
no.
This is not a
like
prostitution ring.
gutters, like digging a hole
Disclaimer.
in your backyard. Come on. All right.
A
Anyways,
hole in your backyard.
I don't know. I was trying to think of something dirty that wasn't like. We're trying to keep our G rating on iTunes. I can't go. With
Nah.
like,
All right.
Do
so
we
what's
have a
in the
G
shop?
rating? I've been dropping F bombs and S bombs all the time.
no, dude. We have to keep our
Is it like PG-13?
Non-mature
Is it
rating.
like a PG-13 movie where we get to say one F bomb like per show?
No, I don't. We're technically not allowed any on iTunes. I think you can't like. You can't
Oh, and then you
cuss
get like
at
the
all.
explicit.
Yeah, then we'll get an explicit rating, and then they will.
Well, let's hope they don't catch on.
Well,
to
obviously,
that.
like we've dropped them every now and then. Like I try not to, but it's kind of hard sometimes. And then,
Yeah.
you know. Anyway, so we shouldn't. But if it slips every now and then, like, you know, it happens.
Yeah,
All
when,
right,
when I have
so-
bad days, you'll know because I start cussing more.
Yeah. All right. So what's in the shop? Somebody else go.
Yeah, I've been starting it off like I like routines, so
All right. Well, then
I'll
I'm just
keep
gonna cut.
going.
You fear change, so we have to stick with.
well, what I got in the shop right now. Well, first off, I'll start with what's not in my shop. I just dropped off the 550 CB550 here over at Evan's shop, and
It's tucked into the lift. And
yeah. He's going to be
Already
finishing
go.
up the electrical on it since a couple
Yeah,
days
why is
ago.
that?
Yeah, why
is that,
can't you
Brady?
do it, Brady?
I all of a sudden have use of one hand at the moment. A couple days ago, I went down on actually Jared's bike. I was running to grab a part, and on kind of the main street by our shop, and a old dude pulled out in front of me, blocking both lanes of the road, causing me to have nowhere to go. And
Except for down.
So
Yeah,
were you like
except
going
for down.
straight on the street? And
I was going straight.
He pulled out right in front of you.
Yeah, and I honestly probably would have stopped a little bit more ahead of time because I saw him pulling out.
Right.
He crossed the like opposite road or the opposite direction on the road.
Okay.
And when he was
making an
merging,
unprotected left-hand turn.
yeah, when he was merging onto my road, he hesitated a little bit, and I was assuming that he saw me, and so I kept going on my way very assertively.
How fast were you going?
It wasn't that fast. I mean, the road it's a 40 mile per hour road.
Were you on that? What's that main road called in front of your shop?
Rancho Santa Fe Road.
Rancho Santa Fe, yeah. You were on there.
And I had just recently turned on to that road, and so I wasn't even up to speed. And I was probably I was close, probably like 35. I think I was in second gear, just kind of cruising. And then so as I thought he was hesitating, I just kept on going my way, keeping an eye on him. As soon as I turn my head forward, going straight, assessing he wasn't a danger to my life, he pulls out right in front of me and takes up both lanes, just trapping me in there, and I just had maybe 4 or 5 feet to react and locked up the front wheel. Jeez. And the bike slid out from me. I walked away with a dislocated thumb that caused 2 fractures on the little ball joint and the cup. So I am in a wrist spica or thumb spica, I think that's what they're called. Essentially, it's just something that immobilizes my wrist and my thumb for about 3 to 4 weeks, but more like 4 to 6 weeks. So,
yeah, your hand's swollen as hell. That's crazy.
Yeah, it literally looks like my hand got attacked by a hive of bees.
Are you icing that thing?
I should be.
You should be.
But it's really cold here now. But it's not bad, I'd say, for riding on the streets for 7 years, and this is my first
that's not
first
bad
down
if
on
that's
the bike.
your first major accident.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse. So I am fortunate for that. But in the meantime, I'm to the projects I'm finishing up, subbing out the stuff that I can't do. So that being said, the XS750 that was kind of put not necessarily on hold, but just kind of waiting for me to finish up the 550. I'm directing my full attention to that, and I'll have an update on that when I actually start working on it. So that's what's in my shop.
Right on.
I've got still the 550. I got the seat.
You okay, man? You sound so depressed.
Yeah, you sound sad. Did you not like the bike?
The 550s turn out great, man. Don't worry about it.
You're doing a good job, Jared.
You're doing great.
It's turning out really good, man.
You're working really hard.
Turned out really good. I got both the new tires on. It looks bitchin'.
Yeah, those tires are probably my favorite tires.
What'd you put on it?
They're just Shinko S41s or something like that.
Yeah.
They're knobby. Super gummy.
Yeah.
They're like square knobs, like kind of all
they look
lined up
aggressive.
like grid pattern.
Yeah.
But this bike is not lowered at all. It's actually raised a little bit.
Yeah.
Shinko really makes some badass tires.
They do.
And they're affordable
price,
and they last
are amazing. I'm totally sold on those things.
Yeah.
Great tires.
But yeah, so finished up the...
Most of the time, most all tires are made in the same freaking factory anyways, so...
Well, for what you pay for versus the quality and the life you get out of them, I mean, they're a steal.
You can afford to put a new $50 tire on the rear.
Yeah, dude, you can get a set of those shipped to your door for $120 from Motorcycle Superstore. They're insane.
Those tires are $50 a piece.
Yeah,
I've ran them before too, and they're surprisingly, like, for how knobby they are. I've gotten low on them,
right?
And they stick for decently good for what they are.
Yeah.
But after we hijacked your shop, let's have you continue.
Yeah. I'll get right back on that. Finished the whole subframe and everything. Got the fender and hoop wall welded on and fabbed up. Finished the seat pan. So that's ready to get upholstered. And that's about that. That's about it with that. And then my first bike that I ever built, my first ever build, was a Honda CB550.
Do you have any zip ties on you?
Not right now.
Because we should totally use one to zip tie that microphone to your face.
Dude, I haven't moved my hand.
He's actually been doing good.
I'm just watching.
I know.
I'm watching the levels every time he talks.
My voice fluctuates, okay? You need to put some compression. Give me channel 1.
No,
I was on channel 1 last time.
You didn't talk loud enough, so you got booted to channel 3.
You guys suck. The first 550 that I ever built, sold it to a kid earlier this year, and he's a pretty busy guy. Hasn't really been able to ride it very much, but he wants to do some work on it. So picked that up from him yesterday, and right now we're just putting a new battery in it and new master cylinder, bleeding the brakes, and then in a couple months he wants to actually get it rebuilt, or not rebuilt, but do some other work to it. So that's what I got in the shop.
Well, let's see. I have Brady's.
But I usually do have zip ties on me. Like,
Yeah, I usually
legitimately pull like 4 of them out of my
That would have been
back.
awesome. Just like, yeah, I do. Actually,
if not
Here you go.
on me,
In the bike.
that or on my shoelaces because my laces frequently break on these boots, and
Or he takes them off to use them to tie fenders up so that they don't fall.
that
shoelaces?
happened one time. I don't remember how that happened. I think
You got to do what you got to do sometimes.
I think I didn't tighten those bolts on the test ride.
Yeah, that'll happen. That'll
Yeah,
happen.
the shoelace worked.
I had pulled the skid plate off my KLR, and I had it like strapped to the back of the bike, and I rode it up here, and I forgot to. I had all the clamps that hold it on just like barely threaded in, and I forgot about it, and they all came loose while I was riding up here. I got up here, and the skid plate's sitting there, and all the hardware's gone. I'm like, oh crap.
Oh man.
Anyways, so I've got the Brady's CB550 in here right now that I'm gonna knock out next week. Get a new wiring harness made for it, which is actually the inspiration for our show tonight. What year is that thing?
74.
74.
First year of the CB550.
Yeah, it's a really cool bike. He's done an awesome job on it, so I'm pretty excited to work on it. It's gonna be a really fun wiring job. And then looks like we might have the XS750 sold soon and out of the shop. We made a really cool new friend tonight at
Yeah, that guy was really cool.
Sean at Trackaholics in Oceanside.
Mhm.
Came by to check out the XS, and hopefully he'll pick it up. But good guy. Turns out I'd actually talked to him in the past. I didn't remember, but he hung out and BS'd with us for an hour, so it was a lot of fun.
I think like a couple
It was like
hours.
2 or 3
Was it
hours.
really?
A couple hours,
Wow.
Yeah, we got here at like 8.
Jeez.
yeah. I remember it was like 9:15 when he got here.
Wow. Oh, yeah, he was here for over 2 hours. Then. I didn't even realize that. We were just having a good time BSing about bikes and stuff.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
cool.
Definitely.
But, yeah, look him up. Trackaholics in Oceanside. Sean's the owner. Good guy. Good shop. So anyways, and then I got the go-ahead to knock out all the work on this BMW R90. So got all the parts ordered for that today, and I'll get to work on that next week too. So that'll be a pretty fun project too. I like working on those airheads. So anyways, that's about it. Oh, I'm still working on my RMZ motor rebuild. I'm getting close to having the motor back together. I got all the
Figure out
new...
that transmission?
Yeah,
Sweet.
finally. I took it entirely apart, finally figured out how it all worked. I got the trans all back in, and I have all the bearings back in the cases. I have the crank installed on the right side case. And a tip there, if you're ever doing this, that I've looked up online and found out. So to put the bearings back in, like the crank bearings back into the case, if you don't have a press, which I don't, you can freeze the bearings and the crankshaft, put them in your freezer for a little bit, and then you could either use an oven to heat up the side cases, or I've got a little torch. So I heat it up around the seat for the bearings, and you take them out of the freezer and they drop right in.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
definitely
news?
a
Is
great.
this news to you?
I've never done it before.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's definitely a great
It works with
trick.
all bearings.
I've
Yeah.
heard people say that before, but I've just never done it. And
Not necessarily bearings, but anything that's a really tight squeeze,
Yeah.
like races,
Yeah.
like bearing races,
Right.
like definitely that is a very, very key trick to have.
I mean, I knew it would work, and I've had people tell me that before. I didn't really think about it, and then I was like Googling how to do this, and then I saw that, and I remembered people have told me, but I'd never done it. So I was like blown away how easy
yeah.
it was, because I tried to test fit the bearings first, and I was like, geez, these are so tight. Like, how am I going to do this without a press? And then I thought about it, and like, it was badass. Like, they literally
just drop in. Yeah.
It was so cool. And then same thing with the crank. Like, the crank's an interference fit too, and like, as long as I heated up the inside of the bearing, and I had put the crank in the freezer, and it was like crazy. It was super quick. So
Yeah, and
It was cool.
the physics behind that is when you freeze freeze metal, it will contract, and when you heat up metal, it'll expand. And so what you're doing is just gaining some tolerance and the difference between the two metals.
That happens with everything.
Yeah.
You freeze it gets smaller, it contracts, and when you heat it up, it expands.
No, that's not everything. Like, what happens if you leave a bottle of beer in the freezer?
It freezes
And
because it's liquid, and then it explodes when
yeah,
you open
because
it up.
the liquid,
that's the
the liquid expands.
Yeah. We're not.
So, look, all I'm saying is he said everything. It's not everything.
All right,
He was trying to point out some. We all understood what he was trying to say.
He didn't clarify metal like he said everything. So I'm not technically I'm not wrong.
He was talking about dicks.
I was talking about huge dicks in Evan's mouth.
And there goes our iTunes rating.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that we had to point that out to you.
That went way over my head.
Yeah.
Usually I'm really good at picking up on that.
All right, we just lost half of our listener audience
All right,
because
anyway.
of the preschool mouths we have now.
They have a sense of humor too. Jeez. All right.
Actually,
so,
I learned about contracting and expanding in preschool or maybe kindergarten.
then your teacher should probably be arrested.
Dude, you never froze water in elementary school and watched it freeze and
it expands.
Well, like I made ice.
Yeah, me too.
I suppose.
All right, so moving forward.
All right, it's Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Bill. All right,
okay.
What's up?
All right. So, anyways, today we are talking about wiring harnesses. So, we were trying to think of a topic, and we have this CB550 sitting here that I'm about to build a new wiring harness for, and so we figured we'd talk about doing that. I've built lots of harnesses, so have these guys, and I think we can give you some good tips on doing it. So, first off, let's talk about, so you've got a bike, and it has some electrical problems, and you're trying to decide, should you fix the original harness or should you build your own? So, I think Brady or Jared, you guys should start this because you're in this situation a lot more than I am. I get stuff brought to me saying, build this.
Yeah.
And you guys make this decision a lot more than I do.
Well, I guess, pretty much all of the, say, projects we do, we go into it knowing that we are going to be building a new harness from scratch. But in doing so, I guess we have a lot of experience.
Like reviving,
yeah, or at least kind of like we have enough knowledge to put together a situation where you can either use the stock wiring harness, things to look for, and almost like the boundary of where it takes to, or
when you just say screw it and start
Right.
over.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the situation, like obviously short of, let's rule out like the wiring harness is chopped to pieces, so you obviously have to replace it. So let's assume you have an older bike that probably runs, but maybe has some like intermittent problems, maybe like the bike you're talking about, the headlight keeps blowing up or something,
yeah.
you know?
And not even like it may not even have problems to begin with, but say this is a project that you're going to be doing like a custom build out of.
That right there depends, or that right there says a lot about if you're going to build your own harness or if you're going to use a stock one.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're going to buy a bike, like say you're going to buy a Honda CB750 and restore it completely back to stock, I see no point in building a custom harness.
Exactly.
I would order a brand new, harness. And that's to say, if your old harness is bad, if your old harness is fine, then check it out and make sure there's
it depends on how far you want to go with it. I mean, if you're thinking about it, may be a possibility to replace a stock wiring harness, then that kind of is up to you. If it's working, some people will say, hey, it's working, there's no need to replace it. But if you're going for like a nut to bolt restoration, you want it to look good too. And most old 40-year-old wiring harnesses, even 20-year-old harnesses, have had some kind of exposure to sun, which will dry out all of the insulation.
Oh yeah.
And cause a note of concern.
Well, say you've got a bike that's not quite as common, and it's not easy to find a new reproduction harness, and it's always risky buying another used harness because it could have problems as well.
Yeah.
So, like, what are some of the pros and cons of repairing the existing harness versus building a new one?
That it's pretty much, I'd say, if there's going to be a lot of modifications from say you have relocated device or components that need to be wired in.
That's a big reason, yeah.
That I would
you're
say,
getting rid of things, like you're getting rid of bar switches.
Right.
Yeah, if you're getting rid of things,
I would say
don't. There's no need to build a new one if that's just what you're doing. It's easy to.
Or you can cut unused wires.
Yeah, cut unused wires, tape them up, exactly.
But the big thing, I guess, what it really comes down to is not that you're necessarily eliminating things, but if you're moving components from their stock location.
Like, say even just, if you're only going to, say, move the ignition switch, then that I wouldn't say is like terms of building a new harness. You could easily just extend the wires to where you need them to be.
Right.
But it also, like, that in itself, I mean, can be somewhat time consuming.
Oh yeah.
And say if you're doing, like, if you're clearing up, like, say the triangle in the frame. What it takes to move that's where essentially all of the electrical components are, including the battery.
Right.
That alone is, from experience, do not try to modify the stock wiring harness.
Because at that point your harness is just gonna be trash.
Right.
You're gonna
Exactly.
be cutting and splicing, and you're gonna confuse yourself, and you're gonna
That's
put
where the
wires
big bundle
wrong.
comes together and all the connectors, and they're set to a specific length, and you're going to end up in a nightmare.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and it's just not. It's going to do nothing but just confuse you, and because a lot of the wires are the main thing for me is why I just redo the harnesses is I usually eliminate the fuse box,
right?
Because that to me it is just a freaking nightmare even looking at it.
The old fuse boxes, especially ones that use like the cylinder glass fuses,
Yeah.
those things, like, they're not bad. Like, the fuses, that style is fine, but the problem is on a really old bike, oftentimes the plastic of the fuse box is very brittle. The connectors, the little metal arms that snap the fuses in place are oftentimes bent from just being used so many times, or maybe one of the little arms is broken, in which case the fuse doesn't sit tight anymore. Just the vibration of riding the bike alone can cause the fuse to either slip out.
Yeah.
It can cause a short. There's all sorts of things that can happen. So, that's the number one thing. It's an easy way to clean it up.
And then you'll notice, too, like on these old bikes, a lot of times, you'll see the stock fuse box, and then you'll see somebody just wired in inline fuses because they tried to bypass that.
Yeah.
Those fuse boxes, they're old, and they're plastic, and, like Evan said, they break and they deteriorate.
So let's look at it so we've kind of gone over like some of the points, and really it's going to be up to you depending on what you want to do, what's your end result, and depending on the condition of your original harness. So
I'll say this on the TX 500, we got the bike and it wasn't running. And before we decided we wanted to build it, we wanted to make sure it was going to be a good, reliable runner because it wasn't a custom build; it was a build for the shop.
Right.
And so we didn't want to put money into it if it wasn't going to be worth it.
Right.
So it had a harness. It was crumpled up in a ball, but it was pretty much all there. And so, these wiring diagrams are available. And so what I did was I took that harness and I was able to splice it together enough and connect what was there to be able to get the bike to run and fire and to run reliably enough for us to say, okay, let's build it.
Right.
Once I built it, I then built a new harness for the bike because it was now a custom build. I eliminated all of the handlebar switches. It was kickstart only bike. I relocated the battery. I relocated regulator rectifier. I relocated
the starter solenoid.
Yeah, the
everything.
starter. It actually didn't even have one because it was kick only. Toggle switches,
True.
and so those were my reasons for doing that. And
Right.
the wiring harness was just a mess. Even though I straightened it out and figured out how to hook it up to get it to run,
Right.
it was never going to be something that was slim and pretty and
Right.
go unseen.
Yeah, and at the same time, too, you knew the condition of the harness when you got it, and it's hard to put a lot of amount of faith in a 40-year-old harness to begin with.
Right.
But that actually, it kind of brought up or reminded me of a point. If you are saying, or even thinking to yourself, like, do you know what, like, I only did a few things and I want to go through the wiring harness kind of thing, and then possibly I might do one from scratch. If you haven't done a wiring job before, I would very much recommend like getting your wiring diagram out and taking your wiring harness completely off the bike and going through it, unraveling everything,
Yeah,
and
weighing
then
it out.
looking at it because there's one thing like someone can tell you how one thing works and why it is, but it's another to actually see the veins of it
Right.
and seeing like how things are connected.
Well, and you can also make sure that the wire colors match up to the diagram,
Yeah.
and they go to the correct connectors, because by the time a bike's 40 years old, a lot of times connectors have been changed, wires have been cut,
Yeah.
so you may not even be able, while the wiring diagram may be correct, you can't necessarily trust that it's going to match the harness you're starting with.
Exactly.
And another thing with the stock harnesses is there's so many extra wires that are not necessary in those things.
Yeah, you end up having, like, when you're trying to get a slimmed down wiring harness, it's just a completely butchered harness, and you have to do a lot more touch up and patchwork than there really is
You're going to spend
needed
the same
to.
amount of time or more
Right.
patching
Yeah.
it and tearing and fixing it.
And you have that
And actually,
clarity.
I came to that realization
Yeah.
on the TX because I was just going to cut out the stuff I didn't need and slim it down. And I started
Yeah.
to, and then I turned around and looked at Brady and I said,
Yeah.
screw it. I'm making a new one. It's going to be so much easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's easy to head that direction because in your head it's like, oh, well, this is going to save me a lot of time because I'm going to modify what I have already.
Yeah.
But in that amount of time and more importantly, the amount of stress and just headache that is alone will be costing you more time than it will be just to start from scratch and do everything new. And it's new wire, new connectors, and you get to route it the lengths that you want, and it's
all
much
fitted. It's tailored.
It's tailored,
Right.
exactly, and it'll make it a lot easier to hide that wiring harness, especially if you have a very exposed or minimalist bike. Wiring can easily kill the look of a slimmed down look of a bike.
Well, let me mention a few things to close out. If you're going to use or repair your original, I'm just going to mention a few points to check, and then we'll just talk in detail quick about actually what to do or what to look into for building a new one. So if you decided that it's going to be, obviously there's a case-by-case basis, you looked at it and you're going to stick with your original one. Here's a few things you should check to look over or repair if necessary. Number one is on an older bike, you could easily have connectors that are broken or have corroded pins in them.
Mm-hmm.
The connectors, the plastic will get old and brittle, and you can have, like, part of the connector can crack and come off. That's a potential for a wire to short out or to break if it's not held like tightly in the connector. So one thing, even if you're going to reuse the harness and you don't have any broken connectors, unplug all of them and check all of them. Make sure the pins don't have any corrosion, and if they do, clean them up and use some dielectric grease on them to keep any moisture out of the connections. that'll help, prolong them, make them last for the life of the bike or as long as you have it. Check for bad insulation. A lot of times on an older harness, just like the plastic of the connectors, the plastic of the insulation, this can be the insulation on the wires themselves and also the sheathing that goes around them. That can get like hard and brittle and can have cracks in it. That can cause all sorts of intermittent shorts if the insulation actually has cracks that's allowing a wire to touch the frame or something. So
yeah, and if you see green, get rid of it.
Yeah, also, if you were checking a wire, say you had a broken wire or something and you cut it, if you strip back the insulation and you see the wires actually corroded inside, a lot of times it'll be like a dark kind of brown, black, or green color, then the copper wire inside has actually corroded, usually from moisture. At that point, that wire is no longer trustworthy. You can't even really solder to it because the wire's so nasty the heat won't flow. So at that point, you're going to be better off at the very least replacing that entire wire, or you might want to look into building a new harness. Broken wires, that's pretty obvious. If you have broken or cut wires, you might want to find out why they were cut, look up on your wiring diagram what they went to, and decide if they were important or not. If the bike ran and the stuff you need to work is working, then that wire is probably fine left alone, but you might want to find out why that happened. And other than that, you just might want to check the components, the important components that the wiring harness plugs into, just to make sure that you don't have anything obviously bad or a bad connection at any of those points. And then also another thing I didn't put on my list here, but the grounds in the wiring harness. There might be a couple grounds in the headlight, the headlight bucket, or up at the coils. That's an important one. Or not to mention your main ground from your battery to the frame. It's not really part of the wiring harness. But all that stuff is equally important. So, if you're going to keep your old one, those are all things you should check out and make sure they're in good shape.
Also, if you're going to keep your old one, but you have to do some work to it, if you know how to solder, I recommend soldering.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't know how to solder, look at some videos on YouTube, learn how to solder. It's fairly easy.
It is a skill you will never regret learning.
Yeah.
And then, if you're not going to solder it,
I would say don't try.
Don't settle
Don't try to
for.
do it.
I don't trust butt crimps and stuff. The crimp connectors just.
Well, the ones that I was going to say is get the ones that are insulated that you can heat shrink as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you're going to go that route, they're a little more expensive. But
when I do
those are the
crimps
ones that
on
I
stuff,
would use.
Like for instance, when I need to terminate a wire in a ring terminal or something, I will crimp it and then I will also solder it, and that's just cheap insurance. And
I've
it's
been
never
doing
gonna
that
pull
too.
out. I always do that. So
I usually
stuff
just
like
solder
that.
and then I have like a little sleeve of heat shrink already on before I solder. Like say if I'm just soldering two wires together, and then just slip it over. And
we were talking about crimping.
I was talking about a crimp terminal.
Okay,
I generally will crimp it first to hold the wire in place, and then I'll solder the wire to the terminal.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I was going to say is, if you see any type of household wire connectors in your harness,
no wire nuts.
Trust
wire
Get rid
nuts.
of those and connect them. And then also, if you see a lot of electrical tape around wires, it's a good idea to
take it off,
and inspect that joint. And make sure it's good, and then tape it back up again, because sometimes you might unravel a piece of electrical tape, and it's just two wires twisted together.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this in our.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, but we're talking about wiring. So.
And look, all for like household wire, like lamp cord and speaker wire. And if you see anything like that, you are much safer repairing or replacing it than even bothering.
Yeah,
to keep it there.
Yeah, chances are that's not the only thing if they had the confidence to do that, they had the confidence to mess something else up.
And then real quick, when I solder wires together, I don't know if this is common sense or not, but so if I'm going to join two wires together to increase their length or just make a connection, I'll generally strip the wire back about, I don't know, half inch maybe on the end of each wire, and then I'll slide my heat shrink down it far enough away that it won't be affected from the soldering iron. And then I will actually I'll overlap the wires pointing at each other, and then I will twist them. So they actually form their own twist connection to hold them securely in place while you solder it.
Yeah.
So is that how you guys do it, or do you have another way
I
you do
solder
it?
a little differently.
Yeah, I do.
Do you do them side by side?
Yeah. Well, I flux the wire, and then
tin the wire.
no. Well, and then I put some solder on my
Soldier.
On your soldering iron?
On my iron, and
Yeah.
then I solder each individual wire.
That's
and
called
then
tinning,
put-
right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Tinning
I
the tip.
tin each wire, and then put a little bit more solder on the iron, and then put those next to each other, and then just connect them.
Yeah. That works.
And so-
Yeah,
just
that's how
as
I
well.
do too. And I usually do like an 1/8 inch
Yeah.
of exposed wire on each side,
Right.
and then
There's
overlap
there's
them.
nothing wrong with that as long as it's a good solder
Yeah,
joint.
yeah.
And it depends on what gauge wire it is
Right,
too.
right.
Like on thicker gauge, I'll pretty much I'll put some flux on each wire,
Right.
and then kind of spread them a little bit and mash them together, so they're
Oh, I
all
see.
like kind of like you're putting your hands
Right.
together, or folding your fingers together,
Right.
and then just tin them till I can see that that solder really soak in and fill everything.
Yeah, no, that works totally fine. I mean, I think all those things are fine. The most important thing is that it's a good solder
Yeah,
joint.
definitely.
And when you have a good solder joint, you want to see that the solder joint is shiny when the solder sets. If you end up with like a really dull, like a flat, dull finish, I guess, yeah, then that's a bad solder joint. On low current wires, like most of what we're talking about, that's not really that big of a deal, but it's always better to end up with a shiny solder joint. It'll last longer, it won't be as brittle, and it carries current better through that connection.
I always I check you give a little tug on each
absolutely.
of your soldered wires as well. Just
Right.
make sure your solder joint is good, and then also when you're tinning them or when you're actually soldering them together, whatever, if you run it, you want to see that solder like actually crawling down into the wire. So
Well, the
that
best
you
way
know-
to do it is you always want to tin your iron first, so you want to keep the tip of the iron coated in solder. Especially do that whenever you're in between soldering and you're going to leave the iron on. Always tin the tip of it before you let it sit. That'll keep your tip in good shape. You can have a tip last for years if you always do that.
Yeah.
If you
It's
forget to
all
do
about
it,
a good tip.
you will destroy a tip.
This is a potty mouth
Man.
tonight, guys.
What are you talking about?
It's just the tip, dude.
tips for tips.
Anyway, and then the best way to solder is, so you have the tip of the iron tinned already. It's got a little bit, not dripping off, but it's coated in solder. And then you actually want to hold the iron onto your two wires and let it sit there for a few seconds, 10 seconds, I don't know, long enough to heat up the wires. So you want your solder to flow. You don't want to be forcing solder onto the tip of the iron and then forcing it to melt onto the wires. You want to let the wires themselves melt or heat up, and then you want to
that-
touch your
Heat up
solder
enough so that
to
it
the
melts
wires
the solder.
itself. Yeah, your solder joints will be 10 times better if you let the wires themselves melt the solder instead of the iron tip, and that it makes all the difference in the world. Once you get practice that and get good at it, your solder joints will be 10 times better than probably when you started. So just stuff to keep in mind. And heat shrink is way better than electrical tape.
Yeah, I try to use heat shrink on pretty much the entire harness.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like if I'm having a wire split out from the harness, sometimes it's a little difficult. They actually make like little
The
like splitters.
split, yeah.
I don't really stock up on those, so I may to kind of fill that joint, I'll wrap some electrical tape around it, but that's about it.
Yeah, well, that's fine. It has its place. That's what it's for. But
Yeah.
you just don't want to overuse it. If you have an important solder joint, use heat shrink. Don't cover it in tape, because eventually the adhesive on the back is gonna like let loose, especially if it gets wet or has a lot of moisture around it. It'll eventually let loose, and you could be opening yourself up to a short or a bad connection.
Yeah.
So that's all some good stuff on repairs. That also obviously applies to building a new one, because you're going to be doing a lot of soldering.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about building a new one. So you decided that that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, this is it's risky not to make this an entire hour and a half. Like
That's actually true. Maybe we should do a full show on exactly tips about building a new one.
I don't know. I mean, we'll do what we can to be not necessarily brief on it, but try to throw in some good information. We could extend quite a bit on this stuff.
We could go for a while. But I mean, why don't we just keep going?
Well, let's
if people have questions, they can ask, and maybe we'll do another one.
Yeah, we'll do a part 2 on from scratch harness. So give us your feedback on that. And we'd be more than happy to extend just solely on building a new harness.
Let's just kind of go over whatever comes to mind that's important for doing a new one.
Some tips for doing that is you want to decide how your bike is going to function.
Right. You have to plan your components first.
Exactly.
You know, what you're going to use, and all that stuff needs to be, if not permanently mounted, it needs to be in its final location so you can size the wires correctly.
Definitely.
Right.
That's definitely important.
So you want, because you're going to use more components if you're going to keep your electric start and your kickstart and keep it, like that, versus if you're going to do a kickstart only bike.
Right.
You don't need a solenoid. You don't need a starter wire. You don't need a push button starter wire. You just basically need your ignition.
Right.
And headlight, taillight, regulator, rectifier, and battery.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then your coils.
Ignition.
Yeah.
I guess that's
I was talking about
electronic ignition. And, yeah.
And I was talking about your key or your toggle switch.
Or yeah. That's actually what I thought when you said it.
What that all boils down to is do your homework, plan all that stuff out first, so that way you don't go build a harness and then realize, oh crap, I wanted to add a on-off switch for the headlight or something, and then have to go modify your nice harness afterwards.
Yeah, well, adding an on-off switch for the headlight is pretty simple to do.
That was an example.
Okay.
I'm sure there's more. Like, what if
that's an easy afterthought.
What if you weren't going to use an electric starter, and then you built the harness, and then afterwards you're like, you decide to go put in a electric starter, and then you need to add the solenoid and the switch.
Yeah, you're rewiring half of that.
It's going to be a lot of work, and
Yeah.
you're going to have to open up all this sleeving and everything and run new wires. And
Yeah.
you don't want to do that. So.
Definitely, with most everything, absolutely everything, is plan ahead.
Yeah.
Look at it as not with just what you're working on, but how it reacts to the entire bike.
Right.
And work according to that. So there's no, it's the word I'm looking for, starts with a C. Conflict. There's no,
conflicts?
Conflicts. Yeah, that one works. Thank you guys.
Yeah,
I feel like
that's
that
what
was a
we're
team
here
effort.
for.
So I would just start there, plan ahead, decide what you want your functions on your bike to be, and then...
No, compatibility. Make sure everything's compatible with each other.
Yes,
That makes more
that
sense.
C word works too.
Yeah.
That's a better C word.
And then once you've decided that, get out a pad of paper. I like to use this, a blank sheet of paper works good. But I like to use
graph paper works really well
graph
for
paper is
drawing this
good.
out.
I just use those legal pads, those big yellow pads.
Yeah.
Because then you can use your lines going down one way and whatever. It's just big and bright and yellow.
Yeah.
And
I draw this stuff out. If I'm going to do a new harness from scratch, I'll make a lot of notes on paper, but I will go draw it. A lot of times I use Visio, Microsoft Visio, which is like a flow charting software.
Uh-huh.
But they have a bunch of libraries for electrical parts. So this is
cool.
probably more in depth than most people need to get, but that makes sense to me, so that's how I do it. And it lets me dump everything out of my head onto the computer, and instead of having a sketch with a pen that I have to cross stuff out and all, I can do it on the computer, and I can drag and drop stuff and rearrange it. So it makes a really quick way for me to get the idea out of my head onto the computer, and then I can move it around and update it before I decide on the final way to do it.
That's a good way to do it too. And then so for the people that aren't as computer educated,
well, paper works great.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I do that.
So
I do
I start with paper, and then I usually refine it.
Yeah.
And then I make a nice final one, so it's all clear.
Or start with a wiring diagram. You could start.
And I always have a wiring diagram of the bike, a stock one.
A good way to do that is print it out in black and white, so you've got a
and
sheet
then
of
use
paper and use
colored,
highlighters or colored pencils. and mark out or highlight all the wires you're going to use, and that gives you your roadmap of what you know needs to be included. Then you can take those lines and redraw them with just what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to kind of select what you're going to be using, but if you're going to be doing the wiring harness from scratch, chances are you're not going to be using the stock fuse box.
Oh, that's true.
And
that's true.
everything will run into that, and
then you have
and then you're going to have
20 wires. When
yeah,
you only
right.
need 5.
So
Well,
I would
none
suggest
of the wire
running
colors aren't going to work anymore, and so I don't know. Maybe that's a little.
This
much.
is, I think, at least one of us touched on it in one of our previous podcasts, where you definitely want to. This is where it's going to be important to look at each component and track down each wire of that component one at a time, and finding out what its purpose is, what it's doing, and why it's doing it.
Right.
When you understand something and why it works and how it works, this is a much easier task, and it takes away from the guessing game. And then that when you start guessing, right, like, oh well, what if I try hooking this up
That's when you
and
start
see what
blowing
happens?
things up.
Right.
It's just when you just start confusing yourself even more.
The good thing is you really only have to do this amount of homework once, because once you get into your head how these systems work and what goes to what, the next time you do it will be much easier.
Yeah, and the thing that sucks about doing like harnesses is the first one is like always the most difficult.
Yeah.
And then like everyone after that is so much easier, and then you get to refine it. It's like, oh well, you just because you learn from it, like everything is like I can tuck this here. I can. The next time I'm gonna route it differently to clean it up.
You learn the tricks and stuff,
right.
And then like it just makes it easier.
You just start envisioning it.
Yeah,
a lot
and you
clearer.
don't forget to put your shrink wrap on before you solder things.
Yeah.
You just kind of get it.
Yeah.
But one thing that helps me visually is when I'm writing it down on paper, I will put my headlight on one side and I will put my taillight on the very opposite side.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I draw the diagram like it's laid out on the bike, essentially.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere in the middle, I'll have my ignition switch, whether it's a key or a toggle switch. And then, right next to that, I'll have a battery. And then I'll put everything on that I'm going to include in my diagram.
Right.
And then I'll start drawing the wires. And for myself, I like to use colors that are very similar to Honda wiring, just because that's what I learned on, and so that's what makes sense to me. So, like, I'll do green as ground, I'll do black as, like, switched hot.
Right.
Oh,
you use green for ground?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Personally, I hate doing that too. But it's
just
true
something.
If you're used to Hondas. I mean, it's nothing wrong with it at all. Really, it comes down to whatever makes the most sense to you.
Yeah, exactly.
The more thought you put into the wire color up front, and make sure that all that really matters is that to you it makes sense, and you know what color does what. Then that's what's most important, because you're going to save yourself a lot of time in the future if you're trying to troubleshoot something.
Yeah.
So
I pretty much I use 4 colors max on mine. Like if it's red, it's hot. If it's black, it's ground.
I'll generally use a different color for the switched hot, for like the off the battery, and then the switched.
Yeah.
And then like stator connection, I usually use yellow for all that.
Well,
brushes I use.
Well, with when you're doing your own
white.
harnesses too, you don't really have switched hot. It's your hot wire is your switched hot, because you're going straight from the battery.
I guess that's true. Because
you're
running everything through a switch.
One thing we didn't mention is like at least what we're going to be mentioning. It looks like, but is I typically use inline fuses.
Right.
Which it eliminates the need for a fuse box. It's just cleaner. It's easier to kind of tuck away. You get to choose where you want to hide it.
Right.
That's just a much cleaner and I'd say efficient system.
I mean, if there's room, I prefer to use a modern style fuse block with blade fuses.
Yeah.
And I think that's. Yeah. For me, it's easier to wrap my head around because it's one place and all those fuses are in the same spot and they're reliable, and
Yeah, but
I like that. But it's harder to you got to find a place to mount it.
Yeah.
Like there's pros and cons to both of them.
And at the
Sure.
same time, when you're doing a custom harness, you really only need one fuse.
That's true. See, because
Yeah.
I have to kind of change the way I think, because like doing this bike
Yeah,
is
it's different.
not normally what
Yeah.
I do. So it because I'm generally fixing problems with stock stuff. So to me, it makes more sense to go the other direction. Well, but this is simplified, and it obviously you're totally right about doing this style bike. It's that's a cleaner way to do it by far.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the end result and what you're trying to do with the bike and what kind of components you're using. If the bike's stripped down and bare, like you don't really want a big fuse box.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
somewhere.
Exactly.
So that goes into it. One thing that you need to think about is, do you want to hardwire everything or do you want to use connectors? The upside to connectors is that you can disconnect every component, which can make it easier to test and troubleshoot things, not to mention replace them, because you don't have to cut and then resolder wires. But then the downside is the connectors are bulky. You got to find places to put them or hide them if you don't want them in view. Connectors can, come loose, have corroded pins, lots of...
Yeah,
So
essentially I see it
both
as you're creating a weak point in the system. But I mean,
It's not really
is
well, I guess, yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, any place that a wire is not continuous is
Yeah.
a weak point, I suppose. So
I mean, it's probably a stretch, but
yeah, no, I
my
see
main
what
reason
you
is because they're
mean.
bulky and then they're difficult to hide.
Well, really, if you're building a new bike, if you're going into like an extreme build like this, and all the components, electrically especially, are new,
Yeah.
then and you're not going to be like, you're going to know that the bike is done correctly. Then there's nothing wrong with hardwiring them, because those components aren't going to need to be replaced for years.
Yeah.
So there's no problem doing that. I wouldn't really recommend doing that if you're. This is not what we're talking about, but if you're working on a bike that you're trying to just fix or restore or
Yeah,
whatever, like
exactly.
you're probably going to cause more problems than it's worth by hardwiring
easily.
and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too. You got to think about how you put your bike together and how your bike comes apart. Say you have
Right.
blinkers that are mounted on the fender, but in order to change the tire, say the rear wheel, you have to take the fender off.
Right.
You don't want to hardwire those blinkers on
Right.
because you're going to be cutting them and resoldering them every time.
right.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
in that situation,
Well,
you
yeah.
would use, I would say order like the original bullet connectors.
Yeah.
The ones that have the
Yeah,
insulation on them.
I definitely-
They're small.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I have to
same
use
with
connectors,
taillights.
I do prefer the bullet connectors just because they are slim and they're in line essentially.
Yeah,
Right.
You don't have a big block, a white block,
Yeah.
Right.
on a black frame with a black
Right.
harness that you're trying to hide.
Right.
But
But I have seen plenty of times bullet connectors pull out.
Just pull
They
out,
don't do
yeah.
well with any sort of stress on
Yeah.
the wire. So
Well, I mean, with that, if you're building your own, you just make
as long as you size it correctly,
yeah,
there's
you
no
size
tension
it to
on
where
it's
it's not getting pulled or tensioned on.
Right.
And also, if you're running wires to to the headlight anywhere or on the bars, make sure you test the length when you turn the bars at full lock on
yeah,
both sides.
for sure.
Otherwise, you're going to be ripping those cables
Yeah,
out if they're
yeah.
too tight.
Well, even if there's not maybe I misread you, but even if there's not a connector there.
Oh yeah,
is that what
exactly.
you meant? Like
well,
just dressing the
in
wire?
general.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if there is or isn't a connector there. If there's a connector, you can break or pull loose the connector. If there's not, you could break the wire from stretching it too tight.
So anything
always check
that's
that.
going to be routed where there is going to be movement, where it's connected, make sure that there is enough slack in the line to accommodate for that.
Right. If you're making a new harness, make sure that your grounds are good. If you've done a lot of work on a bike, like for instance, maybe you powder coated the frame or something, make sure that wherever you're putting your grounds, like for the coils especially,
Yeah.
that there's a really clean spot on the frame that you're going to get a really solid ground. And always make sure that your ring, like if you use ring terminals for your ground to go through a bolt or something, just make sure they're soldered or crimped extremely well, because you could fight problems all day long that could be caused from a bad ground.
Exactly.
So you don't want to half-ass that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's definitely nothing more frustrating when you've gone through everything and then it's, well, of course, it's always the last thing you check.
Right.
And,
on points bikes, it's pretty obvious. On electronic ignition bikes, and like a poor or an intermittent ground can cause all sorts of crazy problems. On a points bike, a bad ground for the ignition pretty much won't work.
Yeah.
But, it could still, you could spend a lot of time trying to troubleshoot something that's a very simple problem. So, I don't know. I mean, I think that's probably a pretty good overview.
Yeah, and like we mentioned, this is just a very I feel like we just skimmed the top of this.
Yeah.
And please do get back to us if you'd like to hear maybe an extension more in depth. We definitely have plenty more knowledge and experience to put forth into building a from scratch wiring harness.
Yeah, for sure. Let us know what you think, and if there's more demand for it, we'll talk about it more.
Yeah,
but
we'll go in depth.
I suppose it's 12:30 a.m., so we can probably stop here.
We got girlfriends.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us again for episode 7 of Motorbike Mondays. As always,
guys.
check out www.motorbikemondays.com. Give us some comments, emails. Let us know, if you like the show, any comments on the website, if you like listening to iTunes. And yeah, we might start looking for some advertisers soon to see if anybody's interested in, or maybe we could do some product reviews, or we'd be interested in all sorts of stuff.
You guys have a product, you guys want us to test it out?
If you're interested, get in touch with us. And check out racetechelectric.com for any of your electrical needs, as well as seaweedandgravel.com. Get a build schedule with these guys.
It's Seaweed and Gravel isn't just bikes. It's actually started as the retail side. So a lot of cool shit. And
there goes that G rating again.
If you're in town, go check it out.
Yeah, just check out. I mean, it's the website, Seaweed and Gravel. Browsing through it will explain it all. So.
And I got to give another plug to our new friend Sean at Trackaholics.
Yeah, he's an awesome dude.
Good guy. Good time hanging out with him.
Like one of those guys who gets super pumped on talking, everyone talking about what we're really passionate about.
I was blown away. We were just talking for 2 hours.
Yeah,
that was cool. All right. Well, anyways, that's it. And we will see you next week.
All right.
Take care.